Chapter 5. Bearing the staff when she went out was still hateful, but after being jumped, Daja knew she had to carry it, just as any trader did in any unfriendly town. She planted it solidly in the dirt as she walked, throwing a coat of dust over the new brass and ebony. It was a beautiful late spring day, growing weather, if one cared for such things. Rows of vegetables, fruits, and herbs flourished in the gardens beside the spiral road, a promise of winter food. Channels of water ran between them, so the land drank its fill. Dedicates in earth green, like rosethorn and lark, and novices in white tended the plants. Other dedicates in water blue looked after the irrigation system, making sure that all areas got the right amount of liquid. Passing the western temple, Daja stopped to bow, hands together in front of her face, in respect to the gods of water. On the far side of that building, plants were replaced by carpenters' shops. Beyond those were the smithies that lay around the southern temple, dedicated to the fire gods. Today she ignored the soft voice of her upbringing, the one that sneered at her, interested in luksha or craftsmen in trader talk. She watched a sweating female apprentice pour molten copper into a mold, and master silversmith put the last touches on a silver urn. At last her feet drew her to a small, isolated shop tucked into the shadow of the southern wall. Inside, a black man labored, his back uncovered and rolling with sweat. Bald on top, he'd let the rest of his hair, as well as his beard, grow long and wild. They swayed as he pounded hot metal. Under a leather apron, the top of his red habit hung from its rope belt, gathering soot as it brushed the anvil. "Kirel," he called over the chime of hammer blows. "I need the top full. Hakoi bless me. I sent him out." Glancing around, he saw Daja. "Girl, a favor? I need my top fuller." He pointed to a long counter where a number of metal and wood tools waited. She leaned her staff on the wall and went to the counter. "What's a top fuller?" "Like a hammer, but the head's rounded." For a moment she saw nothing but hammers. Then she found one that looked like his description. "This?" she asked, picking it up. It had weight in her hands, and authority. Her skin prickled with excitement. She'd never touched a smith's tools before. "That's it." She thrust the fuller into his grasp. He struck the hot metal with the rounded end, flattening red-hot iron to one side. Prentice had to get a bucket, he explained between blows. She'd be back by now. "What are you making?" she asked, watching the pattern of his strikes. He pushed the metal with the top fuller's rounded head until it bulged in the back of it like pie crust under a rolling pin. The metal glowed a dull, sullen red. It smelled sharp and bitter. He lifted the piece. "A strap for a door when I'm done with it." Daja raised her eyebrows. The metal was already 3 foot long. It must be a dreadful big door. The smith grinned. Not once did the steady blows of his fuller lose rhythm. "It is the Duke's treasury," he explained. "There'll be 8 straps, all told. 2 of the finished ones are over there." He nodded toward the counter. Next to it, she saw a pair of long, thin pieces of black iron leaning against the wall. "Take a look if you wish." Daja obeyed. The finished strips were 4 feet long. Something under the surface of the metal moved as she looked at it, like the muscles that flexed under the man's skin. Were there letters in the iron? Frowning, she reached out, then yanked her hand back. "You can touch them," called the smith. "They won't bite." Daja smiled and ran her fingers over the beaten metal. The iron was cold, but warmed quickly when she rested her hand on it. "I thought I saw letters here a moment," she commented, as much to herself as to the man. "Letters, is it?" It was hard to tell what he thought from his breathless voice. "Well, you're right. Not everyone sees them, I have to tell you." "I can't see them, not anymore." She rubbed her fingers over the metal. The sound of feet approaching at a run made her flinch and grab her staff. "Frostpine, you wouldn't believe how slow they were." A huge young man with braided fair hair and blue eyes came into the forge, a bucket in each hand. His run had tossed both hair and a soot-streaked white habit out of order. "If I was the Duke's Grace himself, they still would have taken forever." He looked at Daja as he set his burdens down. "So I made them give me 2 buckets. "Don't fret," the smith smiled, thrusting the metal that he worked back into the forge fire. "This lady helped me." Going to the water barrel, he lifted out a dipper full of liquid and drank it all. The second dipper he poured over his head. The third went down his throat. "What's your name, youngster?" he inquired. "Daja." "Well, Daja, would you mind standing by to mop my fevered brow? Then my friend here can put 3 more bars in the forge to heat and check our coal supply." "Hakoi scorch me, the coal!" cried the youth, and ran outside. His master winked at Daja. "You may have gathered that I'm Frostpine. That was Kirel, my apprentice." She ducked her head to hide the grin until, peering at him, she saw that he grinned too. She took the handkerchief that he offered her. Frostpine shook the water from his hair and beard, much as a dog might, then drew a cherry-red piece of metal from the fire. Tris was half drowsing on her bed when someone banged on her door and opened it. With a shriek, she sat up. How dare! Her throat seized on the rest. It wasn't the thief boy, as she expected, but Nico. Come on, let's take a walk. It's time to sort a few things out. She scowled at him. I don't want to. Now, Trisana. There was a hint of steel in that clipped voice, and more than a hint of it in the man's black eyes. Dared she refuse? Traveling with him, she had to obey, but now he wasn't Temple, he was a guest. Could she ignore the fact that he was a guest who worked for the temple and spoke comfortably with honored Moonstream? Did you ask Lark? Maybe she wants me to learn the house rules. Lark has already given permission. Up, young lady. Grumpily, she descended the stairs behind him. She was not beaten yet, however. Seeing Lark in the weaving room, she put her head in and said, Lark, Nico wants to take me somewhere. Lark was sorting through skeins of colored thread. That's right, Tris. Obey Nico as you would a Rosethorn or me, she replied, her mind plainly somewhere else. Nico grinned at Tris wickedly. Good try. Come on now. Once on the spiral road, he walked so quickly that his gray overrobe flapped behind him. Tris struggled to keep up. They left the temple city through the south gate. Crossing the flat expanse of the road that lay between the wall and the cliff, they reached the grass fringe on the far side. When Nico stepped off the cliff's rim, Tris squeaked. He looked back at her. There's a path, he told her, amused. Come on. Gingerly, she obeyed. There was a track of sorts. Twisting down through tumbled rock, earth, and stunted trees, she scrambled along, catching her skirt on roots. The man stopped on a broad ledge just 200 yards above the rocky shore. A cave opened onto it, stretching back into the cliff. Tris couldn't see the cavern's rear wall. This will do. Nico sat cross-legged, just inside the cave's mouth. He patted the ground next to him. Have a seat. She mopped her sweaty face on her sleeve. Why? Because I ask. Because you don't have anything else to do just now. I'd actually meant to talk to you when we traveled together, but I forget what distracted me. You found out the captain had been to the Strait of Dragons, she said patiently. You wanted them to tell you about it. She enjoyed those tales herself. And right after I got here, you had to leave again in a great hurry. That's right. I had the vision that third ship Kasubo was about to be put to sea. Well, nothing's going to interrupt now. Sit, please. Grudgingly, she obeyed. He looked at her and sighed. I wish that by now you could trust me. She looked out through the cave entrance of the clouds. Everyone I ever trusted sent me away, she said flatly. For a while, he said nothing. Tris, glancing at him, saw a look of pity that made her blush with embarrassment. At last, he reached over, squeezed her fingers, and let go. Then I will just have to hope that you change your mind someday. In the meantime, you're going to learn meditation. Why? She demanded. The others don't have to. They start tomorrow. As for you, why now? His eyes held hers. She tried to look away and couldn't. Things happen when you get angry, Tris. First hail, now lightning. If you don't learn to control yourself, you will kill someone. She felt like there wasn't enough air to breathe. Was he saying she was possessed by a spirit or not entirely human, as they'd thought back in Captain? There were people who attracted spirits they couldn't control. Every child knew those stories. She didn't want to spend the rest of her life in a cage. How do you know? Do you know we mages choose the name we bear once we are trained? She shook her head. We do. My last name is Goldeye. It means that I see things that are hidden to most people. That's how I know. And I tell you this, if you learn to meditate, if you learn to control your mind, you will be able to keep things from happening when you are upset. She tore her glance away from his and clenched her hands, a chance to stop people blaming her for what she couldn't help. What do I do? She croaked. Can you breathe with the sound of the waves? Breathe in as they arrive, hold the breath as they strike, breathe out as they go. She listened to the sea boom as it struck the rocks below. She drew a long breath. Hearing the ocean always had a relaxing effect on her. When the next wave hit, she let her breath run out, following the water as it fell back. Her wind caught in her chest. She cleared her throat. Relax, Nico whispered. His voice parted the next wave. It caught her up, lifting her as it struck the shore, then ran out as the sea retreated. Her mind slipped easily under a new swell of water. When it came in, she came with it, breathing in slowly, filling every nook and cranny of her lungs with new air. Waves are the voice of tides. Tides are life, murmured Nico. They bring the new food for shore creatures and take ships out to sea. They are the ocean's pulse and our own heartbeat. Triss's eyes fluttered. Her mind rode with the new wave. It struck the rocks with a crash, covering barnacles and mussels. She held her breath for the impact, then let it sigh out with the sea as the water fell away. They carry the winds, whispered Nico. She rose to the back of a new wave as the breeze combed her hair and filled her nose with the sea's tangy odor. When the wave shattered against the rocks, she raced on with the air, rolling up the cliffside to flow over the top of the bluff and the road. Plowing head-on into the wall of winding circles, she ran up that. Breathe out, Nico told her. Triss was locked on the wind's rush that was so vivid in her mind. Her body heard Nico and released the air that it clung to. Her lungs filled again as the wind. Triss leapt into the sky over the temple city. Here she was buffeted by new kinds of air. It rose from the gardens, rippled over forges and ovens, puffed in the beat of looms, stuttered over the surface of wet clay. Feel how you are right now, like wind yourself, your wings passing over the circle of the walls. Nico's voice filtered through her thoughts. Pull your wings in on yourself. Instead of being a wave of air, draw yourself in until you're a rope of it. Breathe in and pull in. It was like gathering the sides of her cape when they were flung out and wrapping them in around her. When she breathed out, she gathered more folds of herself under the outstretched fingers of her mind and pulled them in. She shrank into a rope, feeling pressures from the temple's warm spots under her narrow length. Opening her real eyes, Triss yelped. Nico shone with a blinding white radiance that left dark spots on her vision, as if she'd stared at the sun. Her cry pulled in too much air, and her lungs protested. For a brief moment, she felt her mind fling itself out wide again. Then her sense of being anything but Triss was gone. Nico patted her on the back while she coughed long and hard. As she got herself under control, he offered her a drink from the canteen that swung at his waist. There now. Wasn't that fun? He asked. We'll keep practicing that until you limit the area that your mind covers without having to think about it. He has a strange idea of fun, Triss thought, and drank greedily. When Lark asked him if he would mind taking a note to dedicate Gorse on the kitchens of the hub, Briar was happy to oblige her. It gave him the chance to cross the gardens that lay between most buildings on his way, to look at what grew there and breathe in scents. It was also a chance to visit the kitchens and a dedicate famous for giving treats to visitors. The way led down a gentle slope. At the center of the shallow bowl that held Winding Circle, the tower of the hub rose like the stem of the top. Briar stopped to inspect it as he'd done on his arrival some days ago, wondering if it would be worth the trouble to burgle it. As always, he decided not to. What he told himself was that too many people worked on the hub day and night. It was true, and helped him to keep denying that he was done with nicking for life. It was true that someone was always in the tower. Below the giant clock, at its crown, were rooms where the magic was worked, or so Nico had said. He took that as he did all of Nico's mentions of magic, with a shrug. For Briar, the real magic of the hub was in the bottom 2 floors, where enchanting smells flowed through open kitchen windows. Reaching the tower, Briar inhaled the mingled odors of stew, bread, spices, and charcoal. Then, mouth-watering, he carried Lark's note inside. When he left, 2 pastries stuffed with honey and nuts rested in his belly, and he carried a string bag with another 12 pastries for discipline. Now, for a little while, his time was his own. "Where's the greenhouse?" he asked a novice who labored in a small rose garden. The girl pointed to the path that ran arrow-straight from the hub to the east gate. Whistling, Briar took it and walked right into a shaft of light that nearly blinded him. Blinking, he shielded his eyes to find its source. It was a clear building over a story in height. Pulse hammering, he trotted up to it. As Rosethorn had said, it was real glass, held up by wooden beams. Inside, the air steamed, water condensed on the inner walls, and ran in drops like rain, blurring the images of the plants, bushes, and trees that grew there. How did it work? Where did the water come from? Could this crane fellow really grow fruit and vegetables out of a season in there? Odd, he walked down one side of the building, staring through the wall. Dedicates in yellow habits tended the plants, so fixed on their work they did not see the boy staring in at them. Briar wished more than anything he could enter. He could pretend to be lost. As he rounded the corner, stepping into the gate into the gap between the greenhouse and the stable that stood against the east wall, something pulled at his heart. He moistened his lips. Suddenly they were dry, so to the point of cracking. He felt brittle and squeezed. Frowning, he placed a hand flat on the glass. There, to the right, the sadness came from that direction. Carefully he walked along, keeping his fingers on the glass. When his palm itched, he stopped. On the other side of the glass stood a tree little more than a foot high, but for its size it looked like one of the low, spread-branched pines that grew on cliffs along the coast. He squinted, trying to get a better look through misted glass. Some of its twigs were brown. "Here, what are you doing?" The speaker was a tall, lean man with lank black hair and a thin, suspicious face. He wore the yellow habit of the air temple with a black stripe on the hem, the same garment worn by the woman who'd wrapped Briar up in his old dormitory. His companions, a man and a woman, wore plain yellow without the stripe. "Boys aren't permitted back here." He sounded bored, but his brown eyes were alert. Briar glanced at the stable. "But horses are?" The woman growled. "Mind your tongue, boy. This is Dedicate Crane, first dedicate of the air temple that you're speaking to." Crane raised a hand to silence her. "Where are you housed?" he asked, looking down a very long nose at Briar. "Have you permission to creep around?" The boy offered the iron token that Lark had given him to show that he was allowed to wander. Crane shoved it under the woman's nose. "Look, it's from Discipline Rosethorn." He no longer seemed bored. "Are you her spy, boy? Out to steal cuttings for that patch of scrub she calls a garden? And where did you get those pastries?" Briar could see that Dedicate Crane was determined to think the worst. Snatching the token back from the man's fingers, he ran, leaving the greenhouse and the sad tree behind. Soon after Lark had gone on an errand to the loom houses, Sandry gave in to temptation and went into the Dedicate's workroom. Poking around, she found baskets of fleece that had yet to be combed and prepared for spinning. Sandry knelt beside them and lifted out a hank of wool. When she touched it, strands rose to an end. Wool, fiber, and thread always moved when she was near. She had no idea why. It certainly didn't follow anyone else that she saw handling it. "That's merino wool," Lark said. Sandry yelped. The wool twisted in her hands and trapped her fingers. Lark knelt beside her. "It's my favorite, but I don't use it to teach someone just learning to spin. The fibers are very short, which makes it hard to work with." Sandy tried to scrape the suddenly contrary fibers off her hand, but they refused to come away. "It normally isn't disobedient. It must like you enough." "Enough," Lark ordered. Sandry didn't think that Lark meant her. "Let go." She dragged her fingers across the girl's palm. The wool followed her, shaping itself into a neat strip. "It's a kind of magic," Lark murmured. "Look how fine each hair is. Pick one out, just one." She offered the strip to Sandry. Carefully, the girl grasped a single hair and drew it away from the others. "Now pull it apart." Sandry obeyed with just a quick tug. The hair snapped. "By itself, it's weak. There's little work you can do with it," Lark smiled. "But put it back with its friends, and things change." Sandry reached over and pulled away a few more hairs. "Roll them together," Lark said. "Twist them as you would yarn. Now try to pull them apart." Sandry obeyed. The twisted thread held, no matter how hard she tugged at its ends. "I wish I could spin. I wish I could make things stronger. Instead, I'm always told nobles don't spin or weave," she whispered. "They say needlework is all I should want to do, and then they tell me I do too much of that." "Why were you taken up before Honored Moonstream?" the woman inquired gently. "Why were you sent here?" Sandry blushed and looked down. "I kept sneaking off to the loom houses." Lark drew a bobbin from the pocket of her habit and pulled an end of thread free. When she let it go, the thread stretched snake-like toward her, then to Sandry. When Lark held the bobbin out to the girl, the thread fought to work itself free of its anchor. It twined around Sandry's fingers when she reached for the bobbin. "Silk likes you," Lark said. "That's unusual. Silk likes few people." Half hypnotized by the thread's movement, the girl said, "I was in a dark place once. My lamps were going out, but I had all this silk embroidery thread." Part of her was shocked to hear the story come out. She had told it to no one, not even to Nico, during their long journey to Summersea. "I thought that I'd called light into the silk," she sighed. "It was probably just a dream, though." Lark wrapped her brown hands around the girl's white ones. "Do you want to learn how to spin?" "I would love to," replied Sandry. "Do you know how to prepare wool for it?" Lark asked. Sandry nodded. "Parisi, my nurse, taught me how when I was little. She hasn't hadn't let me do it for a long time. She said I was getting to be a lady. Gently Lark smoothed Sandry's hair. Then find me a basket of rolags, if you please, and a drop spindle, one with no leader on it, or thread. Next to the uncombed wool was a straw basket with a cloth lining. It was filled with the long rolls of combed wool called rolags. Sandry picked it up and offered it to Lark, then found a spindle that had no yarn or thread on it. Bare, it looked like a child's top with much too long a stem. When Sandry took it to Lark, the woman asked, "Do you know the names of the parts?" The girl shook her head. "All the ones I ever saw were being used, and I got scolded for asking." "You won't be scolded for asking questions here." Lark pulled the wooden disc off the stem. "This is the whorl." In her hand, she held up the stick. "Here's the shaft. The whorl fits on the short end like this." She thrusted the pointed end of the shaft through the hole in the whorl. Putting the complete spindle on the floor, she gripped the long stem and twirled it, as if she played with a top. Like the toy, the spindle whirled on its point. With spinning, you learn how to control the spindle and how you feed your wool to it at a steady rate. That's why you see even 5-year-old children spinning. It's easy enough once you learn how. I'll show you how to place the leader yarn and how to store your spun thread later. Right now, there's something I need to see. She drew a piece of yarn from her pocket. In a series of quick movements, Lark fixed it around the whorl and shaft and tied it in place. "This string is your leader, the thing that makes the thread happen." She held out a hand. "Give me a rolag." Sandry took one of the specially prepared bunches of wool from her basket and put it in Lark's outstretched palm. "Watch," Lark ordered. Overlapping the end of the wool with the end of the leader yarn, she gave the spindle a gentle twist. As it turned, Sandry could see the yarn and the fibers attached to it twirl until the loose fibers wound themselves into a tight string. Her grip on leader and wool just tight enough to keep everything from dropping from her fingers. Lark allowed the spindle to fall slowly to the floor, hanging from the new thread. A bit of time, she let new fibers from the rolag get caught in the whirling thread until they were thread as well. "I love this work," Lark murmured. "It's soothing." Sandry nodded, her eyes never leaving the spindle. "No matter where we traveled, I watched the local women as they spun. It always seemed like magic." "It is magic. And there's magic you can do with it if you have the power to take something tangled and faulty and spin it until it's smooth and strong. Now there's work that's worth doing." She halted the spindle, keeping her new thread stretched between it and her hand. "Take it. Don't let it spin backward, or the work comes undone." Nervous and eager, Sandry obeyed. Both spindle and thread felt warm to the touch. Lark slipped the wool rolag into the girl's right hand, pressing the point where the fiber became thread between Sandry's thumb and 2 fingers. The girl squeaked with surprise and dropped the spindle. It whirled in reverse. The leader yarn lost its grip on the new thread, which untwisted itself. She was left with a handful of unspun wool. "Oh, donkey dung!" Sandry blushed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Lark chuckled. "I know exactly how you feel. It happens so much faster when it all goes to pieces." Pick it up. Lay 2 inches of leader yarn over 2 inches of wool fiber. As Sandry obeyed, Lark went on. "Think of something outside the work. Your heartbeat, perhaps, or your breathing. Twirl the stem clockwise. Draw the wool gently from the rolag into your thread. Let the spindle drop slowly to the ground as your new thread lengthens." Sandry trembled still. As she flicked the stem to the right, the spindle twirled. She had to let the tool fall, but she also had to feed bits of wool into the thread. She could only use one hand to steady her new thread, because didn't she have to give the stem of the spindle another twirl? It must be winding down. She looked down just as the spindle slowed almost to a halt, then twirled in the opposite direction. The thread fell apart, dabs of wool dropping onto the floor. "Cat dirt, cat dirt, cat dirt," she muttered, smacking her forehead. Patiently, Lark helped her to begin again. "Think of a rhythmic sound, one you like to hear, one that's soothing." Lark's voice was soft and warm as honey. Listening made Sandry a bit drowsy. "Close your eyes for a moment and listen for it. It'll help you keep control over the spin." Eyes shut tight, Sandry listened, though she wasn't entirely sure what she listened for. A rhythmic sound, a soothing one. Her thoughts skipped to the past, to last winter. After she'd come out of the storeroom, Nico had found her a bedchamber in Hadaran's king's palace, above the room where the royal weavers did their work. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, at first she refused to take an interest in anything. Why did she have to? Her entire world was dead. The beat of looms under the floor pressed on her. Without her wanting it, the bump thwack they sounded, dawn to dusk wove into her breath and heartbeat. One sun's day, soon after midwinter, all the looms fell silent. This happened every Sun's Day, which was a rest day, but she had never cared before. Now she was restless, angry. She slept badly. The next day the chorus of looms began at dawn, and she sat up to listen. When Nico arrived an hour later, she still sat up. Looms sounding in her ears, Sandrine Vautorin spun. I have to wind the thread, Lark murmured. The girl blinked and looked at her work. With a dedicate to guide her hand, she had managed to spin 2 entire feet of thread. It was perfect, except that there were 4 large bumps, each the same distance from its fellows. Where did those come from? She asked, confused. I didn't feel any lumps. You were thinking of new life, Lark replied. You thought of it, and you spun it. Then new life has lumps in it, Sandry remarked. Let me try this again. Better yet, we start afresh. Let's take the old thread off. The delicate, slender finger undid the ties that bound Sandry's thread to the spindle. She wound it onto a bobbin and put it on the girl's lap. Keep that, she said, and keep it safe. It's your first thread. It's important. There was plenty of light remaining in the day when the disciplined residents gathered for supper without Nico. Carving the chicken, Rosethorn looked around at the table and said, You, boy. Briar, he said quietly. He was afraid to look at her. She might remember that he'd touched the plants that wound around strings and punish him. Briar, you have hands attached somewhere, do you not? Pass the bread to... Rosethorn squinted at Triss. Triss? Lark said helpfully. Rosethorn made a face. And you, Sandry, I'll take that. The girl handed over a bowl of rice, lentils, and onions. And this one, Rosethorn nodded toward the trader. Daja stared into space, hearing the ring of fuller on hot metal. She didn't notice that Rosethorn was trying to pass a dish of chicken to her. At last the dedicate thrust it under her nose. Daja came to herself with a start. What? She asked, startled. Briar snickered. Daja, is it? I remember now. Well, Daja, would you be so kind as to relieve me of this? Rosethorn demanded, before my hands fall off. A blush stained Daja's cheeks. Hastily she took the plate. Rosethorn looked at Briar, who was eating as fast as he could. Slow down, she ordered. By the time it reaches us, the food no longer tries to run off the dishes. Briar met her gaze. Under fine brows, knit together in her normal, irritated expression, she had large brown eyes with a touch of humor in their depths. His pace slowed, as if his mouth had a mind of its own. Briar heard it ask, What does it mean when a tree has some green leaves and some brown? He cringed, waiting for a slap. Rosethorn frowned. Did you see it in the fall? No, today. She wasn't going to hit him. It's what any grown-up would have done back in Dead Man's district in Hajra. Then the stem has brown leaves, is dead. The whole tree may be sick or dying. Where did you see it? He winced. It had been hard enough just to ask. He wasn't at all ready to mention Dedicate Crane. Around, he said vaguely. Rosethorn sipped her juice. Well, if you see it again, around, let me know. Perhaps I can help. There's no reason for any winding circle tree to be sickly. Once the table was cleared, Lark took the large slate on the wall nearest the hearth off its hooks and laid it on the table along with a stick of chalk. The schedule, she said, black eyes impish. Yours includes chores and lessons. All 4 children groan. I knew you'd be happy, Lark commented. Now, first in the day, everyone cleans her or his room. Some mess is all right, but make your bed, sweep your floors, and clean your wash bins before you come to breakfast. After that, we'll do chores inside the house. She bent her curly head over the slate and began to write. Briar frowned. What if I don't know how to do any chore stuff? Lark smiled. We'll show you. I've done housework forever, Triss said glumly. It's not hard to learn. She looked at the others, wondering how good they would be. Sandry had probably had servants all her life. The only things Triss knew about traders were tales of secret rituals and how they cheated merchants. Did the tales mention cleaning and sewing? She couldn't remember if they did. I'd better not get stuck doing all the work, she muttered. You won't, Lark replied. That's why I do a schedule. As the moon goes from full to full, you'll all share the chores. No one gets stuck with the hardest ones every time. We have terrible ways to ensure no one cheats, Rosethorn said, leaning back in her chair. 4 pairs of eyes fixed on her as the children tried to guess if she was joking or not. The tiny smile on her lips was not at all reassuring. After chores, Lark announced, you learn to meditate under Nico's supervision. What's meditation? Asked Daja. It's clearing your mind, replied Lark. It's controlling your mind, Rosethorn said at the same time. Lark smiled. As you can see, it serves more than one purpose. It's priest stuff, grumbled Briar. Real people don't need it. But you're no longer a real person, boy, Rosethorn commented wickedly. You live here. You're halfway to being a priest yourself. Meditation teaches self-control, Lark told the children firmly with a look at Rosethorn that said, behave. It teaches discipline. You learn to govern and organize your mind. Since a few of you were sent here because it was thought you were ungovernable, Sandry, Triss, and Briar turned red. Meditation could turn out to be the most important thing you do here. It can't hurt, and it might help, added Rosethorn. Lark examined the slate. After that, midday and cleanup. Then, during the summer, Winding Circle has a 2-hour rest period during the hottest part of the day. That time is yours. After it, we'll arrange for lessons of some kind. I'll take care of that sometime this week. Then supper and cleanup. Here we bathe daily, after supper in the Earth Temple, free time for a while, then bedtime. She looked at Dodge and Briar. We didn't take you to the baths last night because you were still getting settled. That was an exception, not the rule. Aren't temple baths just for dedicates and novices? Asked Sandry. We have permission to bring our charges, Lark replied. It's easier on everyone. She looked at the children's faces. Don't look so glum. On Sun's Day, your time is your own, provided you behave. And there are holidays and days when your teachers won't be available. We'll try not to work you to death. Any questions? No one said a word. Then get your bathing things and meet us here. The group split up to collect soap and sponges, the undyed robes given to them by the temple, and wooden shoes to keep their feet out of the dirt. When they assembled at the back door, only one missing was Briar. Rosethorn stuck her head into his room. The boy was inspecting one of the plants that she had pulled from the ground during the day. Come on, my lad, she ordered. That nettle had better go back in the compost heap where it'll do some good. I don't want it seeding my garden. I washed day before yesterday, he retorted. How can a plant do good in a heap and not in the garden? It helps the compost to ferment, so the compost makes better fertilizer. The fertilizer helps plants I want to grow. If the nettle stays in the ground, it chokes out the other plants. Get moving. He stared at her gray-green eyes, stubborn. You and Nico, I never washed so much before. I'll catch my death. Nonsense. Think how nice you smell. When he didn't move, Rosethorn's eyebrows twitched together. I have used up my week's allowance of patience, boy. Everyone bathes here every day. You don't have a choice. He bit his lip. If he refused, she might get rid of him, and she knew about plants. Then he thought of something and grinned. Unlike Sotat, here the sexes bathed separately. He'd wait until the women entered their side of the bathhouse and returned to the cottage. Making a note to wet his hair to convince them, he gathered his things and followed the others outside. A slender, long-haired figure in an undyed robe awaited them at the bathhouse. I hoped to find you here, said Nico with a charming smile. I thought I'd be company for Briar. He draped a thin arm around the boy's shoulders, steering him toward the door to the men's baths. I know all these new experiences must be unsettling for you. Briar scowled at Lark and Rosethorn, who ducked their heads to hide grins. Have a nice wash, Sandry teased as she walked by him. Make sure to get behind your ears, kid. Daja added, Where did she learn that bit of street argot? Inquired Nico. No, don't tell me. I know. Come, Briar, the sooner we begin, the sooner you can dry off. As the girls entered the main chamber of the women's baths, Triss backed up a step, shaking her head. Now what? Demanded Rosethorn. The handful of bathers already in the pool turned to stare. I'm not bathing in front of people, Triss said, crimson-faced. I thought you had private baths, like in the girls' dormitory. It's not decent. And they'll torment me because I'm fat, she added silently. I can't wash in the same water as Cax, objected Daja. I can't. The two women looked at Sandry, who shrugged. She was used to all kinds of bathing customs. In Hatar, the sexes washed together in large pools like these. Rosethorn tapped a foot. She seemed about to speak, and not happily. Lark stopped her with a hand on her arm. I'll show them where the private tubs are, she said intently. Come on, girls. Daja scrubbed in quiet misery. If her family had seen her at Frost Pines, they would not have stopped at the whippings they'd given her in the past. When she was caught watching metalsmiths, they might have declared her Trunkshy themselves. Traders trade. They don't do, her mother had told her the time after time. We don't handle. We don't work. We pay Luksha the lowest price we can get for their pieces, then we sell at the highest profit. It's all right to smile, listen to their tales, compliment them on their craft, if it means doing the trade. It is not all right to show an interest on our own account. I'm so confused, Daja thought, drying off. I don't know what's proper anymore. I don't even have anyone to tell me what's proper. Maybe I must work it out for myself. How am I supposed to do that?